Państwo, powoli kończymy przerwę kawową.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to end the coffee break and we would like to invite you to yet another session that I will chair. This is with great pleasure that I welcome Mrs. Blanka Konopka, Piotr Węgrzynowicz and Mr. Przemysław Kieliszewski, I'm sorry. Kieliszewski.
Nie będzie z nami dzisiaj pana Kamila.
Mr. Glinka will not attend, who will talk on Friday morning. We are trying to stay in touch with him and we will inform you about his contribution. And now I want to give the floor over to Blanka. At the end, of course, we will have a question and answer session, so there will be questions.
To speak here today. I'm a prospective, my name's Blanka Konopka, I'm a prospective PhD student at University College London, and in my presentation I'd like to look at Lublin and give an overview of what I think has made it one of Poland's most successful cultural cities. In the last years, Lublin has transformed itself from an undistinguished capital of one of Poland's voivodeships into a unique cultural centre. Culture is one of the key elements defining the identity and character of our city. This is the statement on the webpage of the Lublin Congress of Culture, held in June earlier this year. So let's take a look at some of the indicators of Lublin's success. So the number of businesses registered in the creative industries is growing year on year in Lublin. In 2015, 4,025 businesses were registered. In 2016, the figure rose to 4,270. In a survey of city officials asked to state which city in Poland they felt had the best cultural policy, Lublin was ranked 5th of 21 cities. It was also ranked in the top 10 Polish cities with the most favourable conditions for culture in the ranking of creators of urban culture produced by Respublika Nowa. A study carried out by the Klon-Jawo Foundation also found that the Lublin region as a whole had the most NGOs working in culture at 19%. This is more than any other Polish region. It's important to note that since 2012, the number of NGOs working in the cultural and creative industries in Poland as a whole has been falling, but in the Lublin region, it's been steadily rising. And if you look at Lublin specifically, the city has experienced a huge rise in the activity of NGOs working in the area of culture in the last 10 years. So whilst 10 years ago, there were only 30 NGOs that applied for funding from city competitions in the area of culture, a month from the end of 2016, 160 NGOs had applied. So that's an increase of about over 500%. And this was for around 260 projects were granted funding. Furthermore, so the Lublin Tourist Barometer has also found that tourist numbers in Lublin had steadily been rising. So between June 2016 and June 2017, there was a rise from 24,000 tourists to about 40,800 tourists. And studies by the Lublin Tourist Office have found that culture is an important contributing factor to tourist numbers. And Lublin actively promotes the fact that it was second in the European Capital Culture competition as part of its cultural offer. It also promotes niche cultural events, such as Lublin's known for example, one of the key events it's known for is the Urban Highline Festival, which is the biggest festival in Europe of contemporary circus. So Lublin's exploiting niche cultural events to form part of its tourist offer. Okay. So Lublin's success as a cultural city is in large part a product of the strong endorsement and support of the city authorities and consecutive presidents who have elevated the profile of culture and incorporated it into the public discourse. So Michał Karapuda, who's the director of the Department of Culture at the Lublin City Office, describes culture in the following way. We think of culture very widely as we see it as one of the key mechanisms of social change. Thanks to culture, we can have a positive impact on what happens in our city. In the first instance, we have a deep belief that culture is one of the most important areas in the development of contemporary cities. It's connected to such areas as creative industries, building of local identities and social capital, as well as creating a sense of joint responsibility for our city. So there's a very collaborative view of culture. Both the current and previous presidents of Lublin have also been strong proponents. Adam Wasilewski, between 2006 and 2010, outlined culture's key role in building social capital and described it as indispensable to the development of the contemporary city. This was continued by Krzysztof Żuk in 2012, when he signed a letter of intent to support social change through culture. Krzysztof Żuk has also made public endorsements for culture and has made pledges to support the culture and creative industries. One of the ways he's done that is through funding creative spaces for businesses in the Lublin Center for Culture and Center for Meeting of Cultures, which has enabled support for over 100 businesses in the creative industries. It was also the initiative of Krzysztof Żuk to establish a dedicated cultural council to work alongside the President's office and the Lublin City office as an advisory body. It's comprised of cultural officials as well as representatives of cultural organisations in Lublin, district houses of culture and NGOs. And to date, it has assisted in the development of Lublin's cultural strategy and has put forward many initiatives in the sphere of culture. So another way in which Lublin authorities have shown consistent support for culture is by committing to maintaining and increasing funding for culture. So Lublin is actually the only large city in Poland which has not reduced funding for culture in recent years, which is quite an interesting fact. And then looking at the changes in cultural spending between the years 2010 and 2014, the leading cities that had the greatest positive change in culture.
Bardzo mamy taką uprzejmą prośbę, żeby pani mówiła troszeczkę wolniej, bo nasi tłumacze jeszcze...
Dobrze, nie ma problemu. Looking at the changes in cultural spending between the years 2010 and 2014, the leading cities which noted the greatest positive change in cultural budgets were Lublin and Wrocław. If we look at Lublin, since 2010, budgets have risen from 30.8 million in 2010 to 54 million in 2015. In terms of competitions, city competitions in the area of culture, between the years 2006 to 2007, 500,000 was assigned for city competitions in the area of culture. In 2014, it was 3 million, and in 2015, 54 million. So you can see a steady trend rising. Lublin has also made very high-profile cultural investments, such as funding for the Center of Meeting of Cultures, and also its Center of Culture, which are two of the key kind of institutions. So funding for culture in Lublin is broken up into two funding streams, the City of Culture and the Districts of Culture. City of Culture is used for larger cultural events organised by NGOs, such as the European Taste Festival, whilst the Districts of Culture is for smaller local initiatives where residents are able to apply with their own ideas. So whilst the Lublin authorities recognise the need to have a balance between these two funding streams, there's not a 50-50 balance. Lublin has actually prioritised the Districts of Culture and funding for smaller and local initiatives with the aim of broadening out culture from the city centre to the peripheries, which is what one of the earlier presentations showed that Wrocław was not so effective at. But Lublin has done this very effectively. The 4 previous editions of the Districts of Culture programme have led to the completion of 650 projects with a total value of 5 million zloty. And in 2017, this year, in conjunction with the 700th anniversary of the city of Lublin, the Districts of Culture programme was actually promoted even further and entitled The Celebration of Lublin Districts. And even more funding has been assigned to realise 160 programmes with a value of 1.5 million zloty. Lublin feels that the bottom-up initiatives hold the greatest potential for promoting change and encourage residents to participate in culture and promote change in the communities. If we want to identify the beginning of Lublin's attempts to raise the city's cultural profile and explore culture's development potential, this can be traced, as in Wrocław, to the city's application to host the European Capital of Culture in 2016, a bid it wrote between 2008 and 2011. According to Anita Scherer in her article, Lublin in light of the bid for European Capital of Culture 2016, she stated that as a result of the bid, Lublin is now a city in which cultural activity is the most important sphere of life of its inhabitants and visiting tourists. As already mentioned, Lublin is the only large city in Poland which has not reduced its funding for culture in the last few years, but the increase in funding was first motivated by the increased activity of its cultural actors, which occurred during the writing of the ECOC bid, or European Capital of Culture bid. So Michał Karapuda, the director of the cultural department at the Lublin City Office, has stated again, the European Capital of Culture competition mobilized a variety of cultural actors to participate in the process and left a legacy of huge activity across a variety of sectors. And this activity continued after the bid had been written and meant that city authorities were not able to ignore the increased demand for increased funding to the third sector. The increased funding led to a domino effect with the development of growing activity of more and more cultural organisations, but also residents keen to put forward initiatives in culture, so that there's now a situation where there's actually not enough funding to cope with the amount of organisations wanting to apply with their initiatives. The European Capital of Culture bid also acted as a catalyst for Lublin's thinking on culture and development, as it is on the basis of the bid that Lublin's cultural development strategy for 2013 to 2020 was written. The document mentions culture some 180 times, and the key aims are culture and arts education, culture and development in the districts of Lublin, strengthening Lublin's position in Europe and the world, and Lublin 2017. So that's the anniversary program of celebrations for the founding of the city. It's important to emphasize that Lublin's cultural development strategy was designed closely with the city's cultural and creative sector in the same way as its European Capital Culture bid was. And this is not the case for all cultural development strategies across all Polish cities. So Lublin made a concerted effort to engage its cultural sector and make sure there was consensus amongst its cultural organizations for the aims of the strategy. So culture is also a cross-sectoral priority, which features in the, obviously, tourist development strategy as well, very highly. Furthermore, Lublin also holds regular public debates and discussions on the subject of culture, seeking to engage its residents and the creative community. There have been several. These include the Eastern Partnership Cultural Congress in 2011, which gathered 300 participants from the Eastern Partnership and EU countries, and was unprecedented as the first congress of its kind devoted entirely to the issue of culture in the Eastern Partnership. So Lublin's sought to actively create and promote itself as an ambassador for culture in for Eastern Europe and looking towards the East. There's also been the Congress of Eastern Initiatives, held every year since 2012, which has also had a strand discussing culture. And earlier this year, there were two high-profile conferences, actually a few months ago, in June 2017. Lublin held its first ever Congress of Culture, which was a bottom-up citizens initiative, bringing together representatives of cultural institutions, administrations, journalists and residents in order to discuss and promote the future of culture in the city. So culture in Lublin is very much citizen-led. And there was also, in September 2017, the first ever Congress of Culture for the Lublin region as a whole. So both of these show just how important Lublin sees culture. Part of Lublin's effectiveness in using culture for development lies in the ability of its authorities and cultural institutes to proactively also seize opportunities for promoting the city's cultural offer and apply for funding externally. So Lublin is actually in the top 10 of cities which put forward the most proposals for funding, for co-funding from the cultural programs run by the Polish Ministry of Culture and Heritage. Another example is funding from the National Center for Culture, which is currently a cultural institution in Lublin entitled the Workshops for Culture, is currently using funding from the National Center for Culture to realize a project to analyze the impact of open-air festivals on the socio-economic development of the city. So there's currently a lack of sort of statistics and data about Lublin's, the impact of culture and cultural festivals and events in Lublin, which the Workshops for Culture is seeking to close this gap. Looking at the city's there's also 3 flagship events, which Lublin is perhaps best known for: the Night of Culture, the Jagiellonian Fair, and the Different Sounds Music Festival, which have all applied for external funding. For other opportunities, city authorities have exploited to promote culture. For example, Lublin's actually promoted itself externally to other cities. For example, last year in Wrocław, Lublin promoted itself as a city over 5 days in Wrocław during the Capital of Culture celebrations. Held a festival, held dance events, which promoted the history of the city. Other ways in which it's sought to promote culture. For example, the Under-21s football championship, which was held in Lublin earlier this year, featured a dance performance telling about the city's history as part of the opening ceremony. So at every opportunity, Lublin tries to take to incorporate culture into other events. In 2015, the city also successfully applied to the EU to be granted European Heritage Label status for several of the city's sites associated with the Union of Lublin, including the chapel at the castle and several other key sites. And it's also proactive about taking opportunities to develop its cultural and creative industries and share best practices. For example, it took part in the Regional Creative Industries Alliance in Vienna in March this year, which is part of an Interreg program to increase collaboration between creative SMEs and companies from the wider economy, and to increase the competitiveness and create cross-sectoral collaboration. It's also part of the Eurocities network of best practices and sharing knowledge about cultural policy between various European cities. So at every opportunity, it tries to take. Promoting the history of Lublin and building a strong city identity based on its history, but also its geographical position, is also a key element of Lublin's cultural development strategy. And it's mentioned several times throughout its document. And it was something that was expressed earlier in the European Capital Culture application as well, where there was mention of a desire to build a dynamic relationship between the city's past, present, and future. So the city actively seeks to embrace its past and connect it to the present at every opportunity. And this is the aim of one of the programs outlined under the presidency of Krzysztof Żuk, the current president, which is entitled A City of History. The 700th anniversary program of cultural events held this year fall under this program. Lublin has also chosen to promote its position in the East as a key element of its identity, and it set itself up as an ambassador of the Eastern Partnership. So far from shying away from its position in the East, which was perhaps once seen as inferior, Lublin actually has chosen to turn this into an asset. It's chosen to embrace its what some people might call provinciality to promote its cultural offer. And the city's history and heritage are also identified as key tourist attractions and key elements of its tourist development strategy. If we look at Lublin's cultural institutions, they're a key element of translating the city's cultural development strategy into action, and the city authorities have invested heavily into the development of cultural institutions. And many of them have development and cultural dialogue as key objectives written into their strategic documents. One of the key aims, for example, of the Lublin Workshops for Culture is to develop long-term development projects based on community and cultural actors working together. The city has also invested in the development of the cultural institutions through conducting external evaluations. 2 key external evaluations were carried out, which analysed the activity of Lublin's cultural institutes and recommended the need for each of them to build a strong sense of identity, design a development strategy, and produce long-term action plans, which the institutions have been trying to adopt. So, in summary, it can be summarised that the key ways in which Lublin has been able to transform itself into an effective cultural city are publicly prioritising culture, increasing investment for cultural projects, actively seeking to design itself as a cultural city through the European Capital of Culture competition, developing a cultural strategy, but also trying to transform seemingly negative aspects into assets, and assigning the majority of funding to smaller local cultural initiatives, which work to support cultural participation and citizen engagement in Libans districts, and exploiting opportunities to gain cultural funding, networking and engagement, and investing in its cultural institutions, using culture and cultural events to build a strong sense of identity.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Bardzo teraz prosimy pana Piotra Węgrzynowicza o swoje wystąpienie. Mam nadzieję, że prezentacja...
I hope this presentation is now available.
Well, thank you very much. Now, the title of my presentation suggests a very extended subject, but I want to focus on one intervention, a single intervention linked to the revitalization of Nowa Huta, which may be influential, may have a strong impact on the development of this area. And I'll be following the bullet points in the slide. Now, let me start with the context of Nowa Huta. Maybe people coming from other places may not necessarily know things about Nowa Huta. Nowa Huta today is one of the boroughs of Kraków, one of the districts of Kraków. Since 1949, from 1949, was constructed with the hands, or built with the hands of its future residents. It has no translation into the sort of identity and the bonding between the next generations and Nowa Huta. It was meant to be a workers' town or workers' city, and it was meant to be the residential estate of a large steelworks. As you can see in this picture, the main point, the central point or location is the central square. We can see the axis from the north along the Rose Mall. The buildings were erected. It took maybe a decade to build the old part of Nowa Huta, and then in 1960s and 1970s, maybe that was more at random, that new estates were erected. We can see some disintegrated town planning. It's a bit of autonomous estates, and it makes it simpler to see distinctly the old Nowa Huta and the more recent estates. After the transformation, political and economic transformation, the importance of Nowa Huta decreased because of the changes, and the district, because of what was going on with the steelworks, some new issues, new problems began rising, such as drinking, such as hooliganism, and some other social violence. In the other parts of Kraków and people in Poland would see Nowa Huta as a dangerous place, not a place to be visited, not a destination. And this stereotype has been pretty popular until now. When we look at the recent figures, Nowa Huta is not an unsafe place. It's not a dangerous place. If we think about green space, parks, it's somewhere on the top of the list. In order to somehow change this object, this image, lots of people got involved in order to change the image of Nowa Huta, to attract residents of other parts of Kraków, attract them and to show them that Nowa Huta is not dangerous, it's not so horrifying. So I wanted to see the institutions of culture in Nowa Huta. We have 9 of them. There is popular theatre, the so-called Bath, the new Bath, the Norway Theatre, and the Nowa Huta Civic Center. 9 different institutions of culture, quite densely populated area. As we can see, about 50,000 people, the population of 50,000. Speaking of Nowa Huta, we are also thinking about the other states, the other smaller districts. So we are talking about 300 people living there. Now, the Nowa Huta Civic Center is probably most favorably located and situated. The access is very easy. It's next to the transport hub, accessible both from Nowa Huta and the rest of Kraków. The Nowa Huta Civic Center is the biggest one with the biggest number of staff or employees, with the greatest, biggest offer, different groups or clubs run in this institution. They also have good infrastructure, exhibition rooms, ballet rooms, so training rooms, and a hall with an audience of 600 seats, 600. So this building is the subject of my diploma project. I decided to interview the workers of this institution at Civic Center, and they presented the problems they faced, and I believe that the problems are faced by all those who wish to do something in Nowa Huta. Now, what is the problem? The problem is it's very difficult to compete for Nowa Huta against Kraków and the Krakow's offers. It's pretty obvious. The number of institutions of culture in Kraków is much bigger than the institutions and the number of those institutions in the outskirts of the city, and it's nothing unusual about it. It's not just a suburb, but we're not talking about suburb with detached or semi-detached houses. It is a separate, distinct district with a large population, and the cultural offer is not that rich, it's limited. But cultural events, performances or exhibitions such as the Beksiński Gallery, the Nowa Huta Civic Center, they are pretty popular with, for example, more than 0.5 million people visiting the Civic Center. So a concert, an exhibition, it's easy to forecast the number of participants. But when we open or offer a new dance workshop or visual art workshop, and people bring children to these classes or these workshops, but then there is this 1 hour or 2 hours you wait for the kid, where to wait for the child. And obviously, Nowa Huta loses compared to Wrocław, to Kraków, because there are so many things to be done in Kraków. And Nowa Huta residents would on many occasions go to the center of Kraków or to Kraków. Plus the stereotype of Nowa Huta. We may have a problem in order to attract attention, to bring more people to our projects. If we were the managers, the leaders in an institution in Nowa Huta, and we know that events that we're offering are very good, but there is a problem of promotion. We may want to invest into infrastructure, and as part of integrated territorial capital projects, there was a general repair work, a restoration of the building with all the interiors and all the fixtures and fittings. But the next stage of this restoration will take part as part of the larger project carried out in Wrocław, the so-called revitalization of Kraków. It's not only about interiors. Each institution will take part in it and will somehow elevate its standard. It's not only about the building, it's also about the surroundings. And there is a good chance for the surroundings to be used, maybe slightly in a different way. Now we can have a bird's eye view, when we can see the surroundings very much degraded and wasteland. The management of this institution often calls them the zone of shame rather than wasteland. This is an old swimming pool, you may see it. And bearing in mind various press reviews on that subject, we can find out that we could create a second district of Dolne Młyny. Its proper name, Dolne Młyny, is a location where an old cigar factory was situated, and today this center houses various restaurants, bars, fashion outlets, and there is a small example of that in Nowa Huta, the so-called Huciak, and some people have been using it mainly on the catering level. It does not interfere into the view for the meadows, the so-called Nowa Huta meadows. They're part of the Civic Center, and or they work together. But this area, this space, looks rather sad, and I wouldn't like it to be spoiled, somehow wasted for another purpose. The environment of an institution of culture should serve this institution. So, full of worries and concerns, I started asking people, or decided to ask people, how to use this space. I offered a questionnaire of 7 questions. It was really a poll, an opinion poll, not a proper questionnaire. I ran it during the last weekend after reopening of the center, when the repair works ended. In order to qualify as a resident, I asked the people if they would, what type of advertising or promotion should be used in order to promote, to disseminate the information about the Civic Center. So, on the review of the opinion poll, all the staff supported the repair work, and they used the space. They believe this space should be open, made available to local residents, should we have a perimeter was one of the questions, and it would be 50% actually said yes, we could do with a fence, unauthorized people should not have access after dark. Now, what would you like the most, or are there any shortages, was the next question. They said they wanted nothing, and there was, they simply knew their purpose. They had no further expectation. And now questions to residents. I asked them for maybe a building or maybe an object, maybe some sort of development, an extra thing to be added, and lots of people replied that they would like to have parking. So car park, large car park, free of any payment, free of charge. I also asked a question about some sort of extra activities in this revitalized space. The staff supported this. Now, most of my respondents were women in their 30s, working for some time for the institution, and lots of them working in, or most of them working in the administrative. 47 residents responded to my questionnaire. They also see the need to have this space restored or repaired, and they would like to have access. They don't want a perimeter. They don't want any fence around the space. Now, as far as the facilities or amenities are concerned, they would love to see something in terms of catering, restaurants, or anything that is linked to leisure or sport. Now, a question was, can we take the indoor activities outdoor? And they said yes, but they didn't have to run these activities, these workshops. I believe that they are right, that this type of activity can be taken outdoors. The same, as far as the respondents are concerned, female respondents, the same age group. So there is a huge need, a desire to restore, revitalize, or repair the space. A question, perimeter or not perimeter, and this space should be made available. This is one. So the most important needs are car parking, and maybe some restaurants, bars, and other facilities, sports facilities or leisure. So the Civic Center could also offer outdoor activities. Maybe not so many people were interested. Now, to recap and summarize, let me just reiterate, the institutions of culture in Nowa Huta are in constant competition against the Kraków, against Krakow's offers, mainly because of the stereotype, the fact that the revitalization project is currently conducted in Kraków gives a chance to these facilities, and this will certainly contribute to their organizational potential and therefore make the management of culture in Nowa Huta an easier task, and will be able to extend our offer to anyone interested in coming and seeing us there. And from the point of view, my point of view, the angle of my work, I believe this space should be used by an institution of culture in the first place, and it's secondary function would be commercial or retail activity, or commercial activities, or sports and leisure. And I believe that's where I'd like to stop. I'm not a researcher of culture. My field is not culture as much as it is urban space. If you have any experience in developing space around institutions of culture, I'm very open, and I'd love to listen to you and find out, sort of sharing new ideas. Now, thank you very much for your presentation. And finally, Mr. Kieliszewski. And Mr. Kieliszewski comes from an institution of culture. You come from a theater. It's musical theater in Poznań. Perhaps you could introduce yourself.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Ja jestem z wykształcenia prawnikiem.
I'm a lawyer,
Chociaż również mam muzyczne wykształcenie.
although I
wyższe.
have also some musical education, and my PhD I did at the Institute of Culture, writing about the policy of cultural policy. For 4.5 years I've been the manager of the musical theatre. However, I am thinking about certain activities in terms of the cultural policy, and not only from the point of view of the efficiency of a manager of an institution. Since I wanted to give you some comments about the cultural policy and two models that I have named based on the project that I managed from the beginning, and then I gave it over. This is the Festival Academy of Guitar. From this point of view, I want to tell you something about the cultural policy as a process of bringing certain projects to an end. It's about a certain planning, a certain creation of processes that leads you to some end. And me, as a leader of an organization, I have the challenge to close a project which is called the construction of the building of the musical theatre. This is an investment that we have been waiting for 40 years, for an institution of 61 years, and which is accommodated in a facility which should not be used for such type of activity. And I want to, well, I think to myself that when asking about the cultural policy, about decisions in this area, well, it might seem that the leader of the given facility, of this self-governmental entity, the mayor of the city, should be a creator of such a policy in this particular scope. Of course, this is much more complicated, a process which is much more complicated, and it seems that the role of stimulating certain processes has to be taken over by the leader of an institution or a leader of an NGO when talking about a festival. Recently, I started to pursue a quasi-scientific activity when I find time to follow this, since I am the manager of quite a big cultural entity. I have been dealing with leadership in culture, and I also have researched into organization cultures of big entities, of big artistic entities, and I would like to execute a project according to which, or within which, I would like to research into the model of organization of big cultural institutions, and I have been able to carry out an interesting project in my theater. This was a research into the organizational culture. This involved interviews with my employees about their expectations, and this led to the situation that in an institution which which recently has undergone some change. My HR manager, I asked her last week about the rotation in our theater in the last period, and I was really very much astonished. It's not something that you can write home about, but in a team of 140 people, within 1.5 years, they rotated. I mean, people would come just for a year, of course, but you wouldn't guess how many people were replaced. 105 in a team of 130. And new people are around 70. So that's an institution after a significant change, and we wanted to go through this change in a way that would not be revolutionary, although a number of conflicts ensued, which we were able, however, to sort of get rid of, to heal, and we have led it to a situation that I hug the majority of my employees when coming to work. So the culture, the organizational culture is, well, my activities, activities have led to a situation. I mean, this includes new regulations and so on, and they said that it would be too hierarchical, and they expect it's an organization that would be clan-like. These are guys who do not even read the contract of employment. They just want that some atmosphere of trust is created, and by our activities we are striving to go into this direction. But this is not what I want to tell you about. The leadership in big projects has to be oriented on cooperation, and I would like to describe you two projects. A problem, however, when shaping the cultural policy, the problem is that the decentralization that we have experienced so far has not created something that was provided for by the law. It has not created the mechanism of cooperation. We have the marshal, we have the mayor, we have the boss of the district, and there is no mechanism making them, forcing them, motivating them to cooperate in certain areas. And looking for the areas of cooperation is much more difficult due to this fact. And I also want to say that in big cooperation projects, we have to struggle, and you will probably confirm, we have to struggle against certain social deficits that we can observe. And I have listed 5 deficits. We have the problem of listening to each other, which is connected with us loving to talk. So that leads to some deficits in cooperation. If we do not talk to each other, we do not know our needs. And we also have the problem with making compromises and withdrawing from our perceptions. We don't have trust to each other as a consequence. And according to my opinion, what we also lack is the true commitment, the true involvement, or a humble leadership, something that is really very attentive to its own organization. In terms of the city cultural policies, I want to point out to several things. First of all, we have to do with the problem of depopulation of the city centers. People migrate out of the city centers, meaning that the influx of tax is getting lesser and lesser, and more tax is paid in the adjacent neighborhoods and adjacent municipalities, they are getting rich, they are creating their own cultural centers with interesting cultural offer for their own inhabitants. They build very state-of-the-art cultural facilities, and the adjacent municipalities, the residents there, take advantage of the offers of big institutions like the Opera House, musical theatre. No municipality can afford anything like this. That's why the taxes of the residents of Poznań are spent to maintain the big institutions, but the institutions are used by the resident of adjacent areas, and this leads to conflicts. We have had recently a very strong conflict about cars driving in with the letter P and Z. P and Z means that somebody lives outside, in some outside municipality. And the leader, I mean the mayor, unnecessarily, he just gave this signal in public space that there would be some fee charged for the access, or roads would be made narrower. That's not necessary, really. The same applies to schools. People bring children to schools in the city, which are easily available, and then the question arises, how about the subsidy to the fares, to the bus fares? And there was a local parliament member who researched into it, what the subsidy to tickets was, to tickets to opera, to musical theatre. It's around 70-80 zloty. So the subsidy of 8 million divided into the number of spectators, you can actually calculate some amount like this. In the theatre of Poznań, this subsidy will even reach 300 zloty per ticket. And the question now is, who is buying the tickets? And we examined this question, and it turns out that our spectators, 40% of our visitors are from outside of Poznań, and they still take advantage of our services. So we are thinking about this. I mean, the city doesn't have the money to fund the theatre, and they have us look for other sources of funding to answer the question what to do, how to create a project of cooperation all around the theatre that would allow us, symbolically at least, to commit other municipalities to engage other sources of funding for the creation of the theatre, for the building of the theatre. There is this cooperation, like a waste collection system is being funded by different parties. In terms of communication, there is such a system. In culture, we don't have these examples, but we are working hard for the company that will build the theatre to distribute shares, or maybe to get some additional equity from public funds from adjacent municipalities. This is a very difficult process, because the head of the district who just has constructed like a hall in a town next to Poznań. Even if he is very much interested in this new project, he will have to explain himself to his members of the local parliament why is he funding the theatre in Poznań, even if he has strong statistical data showing that the residents of his commune use the services of the theatre in the center of Poznań. I would like to tell you something about a different experience. So in order to take, you need to give first. That's the normal case with normal relations. A festival
niespodziewanie dla nas takiego malutkiego
has
projektu
gotten
kursu gitarowego
10
dla
years old.
przejętego
That was
projektu
a very small project,
Śląska
a
zresztą.
guitar
Profesor
training.
Zaleski, obecnie prorektor Akademii Muzycznej we
Professor
Wrocławiu,
Zaleski, who
po
is
17 latach
the vice chairman of the Musical Academy in
porzucił
Wrocław,
oddać najważniejszy utwór gitary klasycznej
he was
w
really
Polsce.
fed up and he wanted to give away the most popular competition of guitar competition in Szczawno-Zdrój, and I was the manager of his pupil,
To namówiliśmy
Łukasz Matuszewski.
samochodem z Poznania
We,
do Wrocławia pana profesora, żeby ten festiwal przekazał w ręce swojego najlepszego ucznia.
encouraged
No, nie festiwal,
professor
tylko kurs
to give away
gitarowy.
this
Kurs gitarowy w takiej małej miejscowości
guitar training to his pupil, and then we located this guitar training in a town next to Poznań. We got a subsidy of 12,000, and we organized 5 concerts out of nothing really. Our association's purpose was not exactly to organize this project, however we did it with our association, and today the festival has become quite big. This includes around 50 locations all over Wielkopolska, including Berlin even, which we annexed and incorporated in Wielkopolska province. And this project even exceeds our organization. There is an association. This association hires a producer for the project, but although the partnerships, I mean the funding of the project, this is the funding of the project, and the project is characterized by a big number of partners. I couldn't even list them on one page. So that's really a very difficult project, but this contributes to trust. It's a non-commercial project, and we put a lot of effort into encouraging mayors, local institutions of culture, to convince them that we would not take away anything from them, that we want to do something together, that we want to do something together under the common logo, that we want, well, it's not always possible with everybody because there are some local ambitions involved, or the inability to communicate on our side led to the situation that we were not able to enter in such cooperations. But we have some capital and a number of relations, local relations, in the area around the town, which we call Z, for the anonymity reasons. Well, this means that we can actually start another project in the area. We want to build a musical theater because we have given something away. The annual subsidy from the budget of the city for the festival of 200,000, this co-finances concerts which take place outside of the borders of the city of Poznań. As I understand, yes, I understand your sign. Now,
teraz przejdę może do... Aha, chcę tylko powiedzieć o tym, że...
let me just briefly mention that we decided, we have taken started talks with Poznań Municipality. The budget of the festival is around 600,000, with a small subsidy from the Ministry of Culture, from local government of the province 80,000, 200,000 from the city of Poznań, Jarocin, Gniezno municipalities, and also some smaller municipalities, plus ticket sales. Only 4 concerts were sold out to the public. The others were just sponsored, but we are collecting funds for a charitable purpose, that it is not for free. And what we are trying to do is actually to bring about a situation that the association that manages the festival obtains the possibility of re-granting the funds, so that the commitment of the local partners in Poznań or outside, that it gets even bigger, so that we should be the arm of self-government to distribute the money, so that our partners get even more motivated to take up more active cooperation and more commitment. And the musical theater. Well, this is the motivating strategy. We are giving away something from our metropolis so that artists of the highest quality, even those from abroad, that local communities cannot afford, and they do not have even the competences to find those artists to determine them. We share this competence. And there is another strategy, the integrating strategy. I mean, there is only one such institution in the province, which is the musical theater, and they want to build a theater, a new seat of the theater, which will be used by the residents from outside of the city. Well, this is taking a lot of time, and now we are trying to carry out different activities. We have done some research that confirms the statistics that we have many visitors coming from outside of Poznań. And we are trying to activate local governments from outside to create a network of cooperation. This will be based on a partnership, on a company that will build the theater. Within the last 2 years, we created 5 theater stages outside. We will show the first performance of a play first outside, not in the main theater, just to show our commitments to the adjacent areas. This is all for the purpose of creating trust, and there is a lot of activities in the district and in the metropolis of Poznań. This should bring about a situation that the deficits in terms of lacking trust and cooperation, that they should be diminished so that we create a foundation for cooperation, for a big cooperation project that the local leader would also feel us the owners of. It seems much easier to organize in culture and not so much in waste collection, where you normally calculate it in zloty. Here, this requires more imaginary force, but it is easier to operate. It's easier to operate than in the so-called hard areas like transportation or waste collection. I hope that this may encourage you to discuss. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, the speakers. And may I just open the debate part of the last academic module or session. So may I just encourage you. If you allow, one brief question to close my brief presentation. One of the speakers asked for encouragement, for inspiration. I'd love to talk to him after the session, but then asking you about the actual ideas. The first thing that comes to my mind is the so-called remember about the gardens. Hart Park or Tier Park, depending on what we want to locate in a very specific spot in the city, depending on what we do about green spaces. I would actually encourage you to be more adventurous. If we're talking about post-socialist space, and I just show one of the proposed project, the Museum of the PRL, and I think I've seen, we've experienced something that would maybe called the Disney aspect of the PRL museum. Perhaps we should see what's going on in the Gorky Park. There is a museum of fallen statues not far from the Tiotakowska Gallery. So that would be a very, very inspiring and maybe adventurous idea to fill in this space. Now, thank you very much, Mr. Kieliszewski, for sharing the Poznań experience. I absolutely love certain ideas that you arrange for in Poznań, working together with the authorities. Maybe I don't like so much the stealing ideas from Wrocław, but we still hope to work together. Now the question is, how do you manage to get outside the box of institutionalized thinking? This is our big problem here in Wrocław and in other communes, neighboring communes, because one of the mayors, local mayors from one of the small country councils, that Wrocław turned its back to local communities around Wrocław, that there is no money and there are no institutional instruments. We do have such instruments like ZIT. You say nothing of perhaps using the same tools as civil servants or as local councils use. It's very much. I'm not sure if I should mention that. I don't seem to. Maybe let me put it differently. This is the festival is a movement of goodwill. It's been supported. It has won formal support, official support, and the big events are held in Poznań, mainly Poznań, and an artist who can actually who can perform in Poznań and then conduct workshops outside Poznań in a small community in the country. How can I put it? A large municipal budget gives an opportunity for a local community paying maybe 8,000 zlotys, but they can still host world-class artists in a small civic center, and we have the full audience because there's a world-class performance of a guitar player. So with small contribution from the local council from a rural community or one of the small satellite cities or villages, they can get this benefit. And it's all about working together. And that's why I mentioned the leadership, but the leadership at a lower level. I believe the same things happen in Wrocław. Mr. Kosendiak, for example, he also defined his philosophy. He said, we are trying to draw audiences from local communities, from outside Wrocław, but they also go out. They leave Wrocław and perform there. No, thank you. And the microphone goes to our friends from Kraków. Well, thank you, Jacek. My question or my comment is to Piotr Węgrzynowicz, a Krakowian myself. In order to put some structure to your study, well, there is this co-location, revitalization and Nowa Huta. But I don't think we are seeing anything like revitalization in Nowa Huta. We have the revitalization at the institutional level because we have an act of parliament to that effect. In order to be able to run a project, we need to identify the various zones. And we have 3 most gentrified areas in Kraków: Stare Miasto, Kazimierz and Zabłocie. Before the bill was passed, each local council had been trying to find some funds, and Kraków found a way. It's called rehabilitation of estates or rehabilitation of parishes. Nothing happened. Nothing like that happens in Nowa Huta. What you've shown us is simply repair, some sort of overhaul, some general restoration work, putting up a building rather than revitalization. At a certain stage, however, Nowa Huta started to change its social image. It has become the sort of fashionable district among young people, and there is an influx of young people. In Nowa Huta, in my view, there is one important actor. These are tenants' committees. In Kraków, for example, we have free market, and if you want to open a coffee shop, you may do that. In Nowa Huta, everything was sort of cooperative thing, and things maybe 10 years ago, they started opening coffee shops or tea shops because these tenants' committees would be closing down such places as being sort of disturbing the community. So anything opened past 6 p.m. Was found disturbing. Now, Dolne Młyny is gentrification rather than revitalization. I'm a regular. It's a post-industrial site, and there are more than 10 clubs set up there, and a couple of thousand people go partying there. But regular residents of that district can't really live there. In Kraków, the same happened to Kazimierz, and Titano is another. Well, it is an idea to revitalize Nowa Huta, but in Kraków, people don't like these ideas. So Nowa Huta, if you bear in mind what happened to the Lenin monument, I don't think the residents of Nowa Huta want to become a scansion of communism. Well, there is of course the problem of funding. Well, we can obviously, well, I know it, I just know it hands-on, and this is about this conference. Now, hello, there is a pending question, and this concerns Nowa Huta. We saw a slide, there were some commercials or banners on a building, integration of various policies, city policies. We know that the bill is developed, Parliament bill is prepared on the environment bill, or urban environment bill, and it's all about banners and billboards, etc. Now, urban culture should access its recipients or beneficiaries, and you can see an example of a billboard, a poster. We need to be aware of the fact that modern or the most recent architecture can become a carrier of advertisements or promotion. We can see the logo of a European Capital of Culture incorporated in the building, and it's not obtrusive. It's so we could actually take better care of that if we restore pieces of architecture, and we'd like to promote culture, and when we are at the stage of developing the functional program of the building, we could just think how to put this analogous information, not the one on the website, how can we incorporate it here and communicate things to the local neighborhood. Now, the surroundings of the Civic Center in Nowa Huta and the landscape, it's actually the Landscape Act, and the protection of Nowa Huta meadows. I think this billboard or poster will have to be taken away, should have to vanish. The facade of the building is not beautiful, so it probably covers an unattractive part of the building. But I think it's also problematic from the point of view of the institution of culture. How can we attract more visitors? But there are the building. Let's think of the building of the National Museum in Kraków. This building also carries certain billboards promoting culture. I think it's one of the issues that the institutions have to decide for themselves. One more, I'd like to shed some light on another thing. The city wants to control chaos. On the other hand, institutions use advertising carriers. So there is always a way of compromise or a way to find an agreement. I would encourage the management of the institutions of culture. The very last question. Bartosz Gradecki. Perhaps a untypical question. There is an opinion, notorious opinion, that culture is something made by elites and looking down at ordinary people, but using their money. And this is probably a risk or a threat to the management of culture. But I think that three statements that you made here, we are focusing on the Union, on the European Union, on politicians, or what you want or you don't want about an institution of culture. Have you ever mentioned the so-called consumer of culture, and you just look down on ordinary people in Nowa Huta, people who just want to have a hot dog? Maybe you should think more about the culture consumer and what can a culture consumer afford. Maybe it's not just waiting for funds, dripping funds. Maybe you should think about the consumer. I think the problem that you've just raised, the issue that you've just raised, we discussed it over the previous module, evaluation from the residents' perspective. It's an open issue. Very briefly, perhaps I should rephrase what I've said. It's not about it. The guitar festival was aimed at reaching those residents who are probably deprived or it's like the top quality classical music. It's free of any charge, a free concert, and we provide access to this to somebody who may not come to a central city or perhaps may not afford to come there. When the beneficiary, this recipient of culture, comes over to a theater venue, and the venue is not impressive, maybe it's too small or inappropriate, or maybe that was our aim, to move things from there. Thank you very much. I'd like to close the session now. This is the end of the academic part, and we have a couple of events to follow. At 6 p.m. we'll have a debate on the culture and urban policy, strategies of urban development, and we have number of events in Ruszka 64, lock-up, deepening participation towards sustainable local field, Sylvia Nadzin. We finish at 10 p.m. with audio zone. You're welcome to take part, and tomorrow we start at 9 o'clock. So may I just encourage you to take part.